My son told the neighbor I was the new maid. I said nothing. But when he saw the contract I handed him, the soup was still hot. I remember that part clearly. The smell of thyme and garlic floated through the kitchen, steam curling upward like some gentle spirit trying to escape the tension that now filled the air. My hands, slightly arthritic and veined from age, were steady as I ladled broth into a ceramic bowl. But my ears, they caught every word. "I guess she's like the maid now," my son laughed. "She's retired. This gives her something to do." He said it to the neighbor out front, casual and loud enough for the world to hear. I didn't move, not right away. Just stood there with that ladle dripping soup back into the pot. I looked at the soft blue walls of the kitchen I had painted for him when he bought the place, back when he first got married, and didn't have the money to fix anything but the roof. I stood in that room holding lunch for a family that no longer looked at me as a person, and I realized I had become invisible, not cruelly, not violently, just slowly erased. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 68 years old, and I lived in my son's house in Savannah, Georgia. It was supposed to be temporary. That's what he'd said after my hip replacement surgery. "Stay with us while you recover, Ma. We've got the space." I believed him. I came with 2 boxes and a heart full of trust. Now I'm not so sure which weighed more. The neighbor laughed. I heard the crunch of gravel as he walked away. The screen door creaked open a moment later, and my son entered the kitchen with the casualness of someone who had nothing to regret. He didn't look at me. "Hey, can you switch the laundry when you're done?" he mumbled, grabbing a soda from the fridge. Then he left. No eye contact, no shame, not even the courtesy of a please. I turned off the stove and placed the ladle on the counter, its metal handle clinking against the tile. I didn't eat. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table alone. I looked around a room I once helped furnish, now stacked with toys I always stepped over. Framed photos of my son and his family hung on the walls. Not one of me, not one of their grandmother who watched over them while their parents worked long shifts. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary anymore. To them, I was the maid. But still, I said nothing. Not then, not yet. I waited. I watched. I listened. Because sometimes silence is louder than screaming. Sometimes waiting is its own kind of justice. And I wasn't done waiting yet. If you were in my shoes, hearing your own child say that about you, what would you do? The guest room was never really mine. The walls were still painted with his wife's old pastel choices. Lavender and pale mint colors that made me feel more like a placeholder than family. The closet was half full of Christmas decorations and clothes they no longer wore, and the bed sagged in the middle. But I never complained. That was the promise I made myself. When I moved in, don't be a burden. After my surgery, I truly needed help just for a few weeks. My son had insisted, "It's no problem, Ma. We'll get you back on your feet." And they did help at first. His wife even made me tea in the mornings. The grandkids would come in with their messy fingers and their wild stories. I felt useful just sitting in their chaos. But time moved on, and so did their warmth. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. The way they stopped including me in weekend plans. The way they started talking over me like I wasn't in the room. The way my name shifted from Mom to her when they thought I couldn't hear. It started with little tasks, folding towels, sweeping the porch. "You like staying busy, don't you?" my daughter-in-law once said with a tight smile, as she handed me a basket of laundry that wasn't mine. I smiled back. I always smiled back. I thought being useful meant being loved. Weeks stretched into months. They stopped asking if I needed anything. Instead, they started asking for things. Can you run a load of whites? Can you keep the kids while we go out to dinner? Can you make dinner tonight? I'm exhausted. Exhausted. I remembered being exhausted when I worked 2 jobs and still came home to cook for my boy every night. I remembered exhaustion when my husband passed away and I kept the house from falling apart alone. But I never used it as a shield. I never used it as a way to push my mother out of the center of my life. One night, as I wiped down the counters after everyone else had gone to bed, I caught my reflection in the oven door. I looked like the help, but it wasn't the chores that broke me. I'm not too proud to wash dishes or scrub baseboards. No, what broke me was the slow, quiet realization that no one saw me anymore. Not as a woman, not as a mother, not as a human being. I had become part of the furniture. I called an old friend that week, Marla. We hadn't spoken in months, years really. She was still in Charleston, and I could hear the Atlantic in the background of her phone call. When I told her what was happening, she didn't tell me to stand up for myself. She didn't say you need to leave. She just said, don't let them make you disappear. The next morning, I woke up early. I moved quietly through the house. Coffee brewed, toast popped up. I laid out breakfast the way I always did, but this time I watched them eat it without saying a word to me. The children laughed. My son scrolled on his phone. His wife kissed him on the cheek before taking her plate to the sink. Then they all left. I was still standing at the corner of the kitchen when the door shut. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream. But instead I sat down. I poured myself a cup of the same lukewarm coffee I'd been drinking for months. I looked around the kitchen, my fingerprints on every surface, my routines built into their comfort, and I realized something. I didn't belong here, not anymore. But the story wasn't going to end here either. If your own child slowly erased you like this, bit by bit, task by task, what would you do next? I wish I could tell you there was one big moment, one explosive argument that clarified everything. But the truth is, it happened drip by drip. My identity didn't shatter overnight. It was chipped away every time I was asked to clean something without thanks. Every time I heard, "We're heading out," "You've got the kids right," without a second thought. Every time I made dinner and sat at the table, only after they had already started eating. And the worst part, I let it happen. I told myself this was just how things were now, that it was better to stay quiet, better to help, better to keep the peace than to ask for it. Then came the birthday. It was a Saturday. The air was thick with humidity, and I had woken up early to bake a lemon pound cake. My mother's recipe, the one I made every year, even when no one asked for it. I wore my nicest blouse, even ironed it the night before. I curled my hair just a little and put on a touch of blush to hide the pallor I'd started noticing in the mirror lately. I sat in the living room and waited. 1 hour, then 2. The house was quiet. They left that morning, just like that. No card, no breakfast, not even a passing happy birthday. I waited all day, refusing to believe what I already knew. At 6 p.m., I sliced the cake into quarters and placed it into Tupperware, labeling it with their names. I put a piece in each lunchbox for the next day. No one asked where it came from. I lay awake that night and stared at the ceiling. I traced every crack, every shadow. I thought about the old house, my house, the one I sold after James died. I had poured my grief into those walls, every inch scrubbed and painted with sorrow and survival. I had downsized and moved in here because it was his turn to help. That's what people do in families. We lift each other. But I was the only one still lifting. That night I climbed into the attic. It wasn't easy. My hip still ached on bad days. But I opened the hatch and pulled myself up, slowly, using the railing and my own quiet rage as fuel. The boxes were exactly where I left them, 4 of them labeled in black marker. I opened the first. Old tax records, bank statements, pay stubs from 3 jobs ago. I ran my fingers over the yellowing paper proof of every dollar I had ever earned honestly. The second box was filled with family photos. One of James and me at Coney Island, his arm around my shoulder like a promise. Another of my son as a baby, his cheeks round and flushed, reaching up at the camera like I was the whole world. And the third box, this was the one I hadn't touched since 2013. Inside a folder with the title Eastgate Property, written neatly on the tab, the rental house. I had almost forgotten about it. Bought with quiet savings fixed up in the years after James passed. I let a quiet young couple live there, Janet and Mike. They paid below market rent. Always kind, always grateful. And they never missed a payment. I barely thought about it after they moved in. The income went straight into a separate savings account I'd opened just in case I ever needed it. I pulled out the deed and ran my thumb over the embossed seal. Still in my name, still mine. I closed the folder and held it to my chest like it was the last warm thing I had. Downstairs, laughter erupted from the living room. A movie, maybe, or a joke I wasn't invited to hear. My grandson's high-pitched giggle pierced through the floorboards like it was mocking me. I took a deep breath, and then I smiled, not out of joy, out of certainty, because they thought I had nothing. But I still had this. I still had me. If your own child forgot your birthday, and you were holding a deed they never even knew existed, what would you do next? The next morning I didn't make breakfast. No toast, no eggs, no sliced apples fanned out like I usually did for the kids. I stayed upstairs. I listened to the chaos below as they realized nothing had been prepared. No lunchboxes packed. No one came to check on me. No one knocked. They just figured it out without me. That was important to see. Because I needed to know they could survive without me before I made my next move. Because what I was about to do wasn't revenge, it was redefinition. I took the Eastgate folder to the bank first. There were still funds in the property account, almost $15,000 saved quietly over the years. I opened a new account in my name, only moved it all and closed the old one. The teller, a young woman with perfect eyeliner, asked politely if I was starting a new chapter. I think I am, I said, smiling faintly. She smiled back. She didn't know how right she was. Then I went to the property. Eastgate looked almost exactly as I remembered. A little white house with green shutters, rose bushes lining the walkway, and wind chimes that swayed in the late spring breeze. I hadn't been inside in years, but Janet had kept it immaculate. I knocked. She answered with a surprised Miss Grant and threw her arms around me. The hug caught me off guard. It had been so long since someone held me with real affection. We sat on the porch and drank iced tea. I asked how she and Mike were doing. She told me about his new job, their baby, on the way, how grateful they were for the fair rent over the years. I told her I would be moving back in. At first she blinked. Then her face fell. Of course you have every right. I touched her hand gently. No, Janet, I'd never kick you out. But I'll be taking the upstairs unit. You'll stay downstairs rent-free for the next 6 months. Her mouth opened, slightly stunned. But why? I looked out at the street, a quiet block, magnolia trees. The kind of silence that isn't empty but peaceful. Because you treated me like a person. And that's more than I can say for my own son." She didn't argue. Later that week, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Dale. He was an old colleague from the city finance department. Retired like me, but sharp. Sharp in the way you need when you're an old woman making quiet power moves. "I want to change the lease on the house where my son lives," I told him. "You mean the one in your husband's trust?" I nodded. "I took over the trust when James passed, quietly. My son never bothered with the paperwork, so he never knew I assumed ownership 3 years ago." Mr. Dale raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly would you like to do with it?" "I want to issue a lease renewal, one with fair market rent, and a 6-month term." His pen clicked once, twice, 3 times before he leaned back in his chair. "You don't want to evict him?" "No, I want him to choose." Mr. Dale smiled, graceful, poetic. "Just overdue," I said. He drafted the letter that afternoon. Heavy paper, formal language, no emotion, just numbers and facts. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, Eastgate's upstairs kitchen, now mine again, and stared at the envelope with my son's name on it. I imagined his face when he opened it, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I needed him to see me, really see me for the first time in years. I went to bed without setting an alarm, and for the first time in months, I slept all the way through the night. If you held the power to make your child choose between respect or consequences, would you hand them the envelope? The next Sunday, I made dinner one last time. Roast chicken garlic potatoes, sweet corn pudding, my son's favorite. The scent filled the house just like it used to back when we were a family, back when he still called me Mom, with a voice that carried softness. I even set the table with the good napkins, the cloth ones from my old house that I brought with me when I moved in. I didn't say a word about the envelope I had tucked under his plate. It sat there cream-colored and weighty, like a ghost no one could see yet. They filed in one by one, him, his wife, the kids. Their chatter filled the air. Not one of them noticed that I hadn't smiled once. We sat down. My son lifted his fork, then paused when he saw the envelope beneath it. "What's this?" he asked, mouth half full. I met his eyes. "Something you need to read after dinner." His wife reached for it. "Is it from school?" "No," I said, firm but even. "It's from me." The kids, oblivious, giggled and asked for more pudding. I dished it up while watching my son try to ignore the envelope, now burning a hole into the wood beneath his hand. He didn't open it right away. That would have required courage. Instead, he ate, silently, uncomfortably. After the meal, I cleared the plates, moving with the same quiet grace I had mastered in that house. Not rushed, not angry, just present. That envelope sat untouched for 20 minutes. Then finally he picked it up. He read the header first, "Notice of lease renewal and rent adjustment." His brow furrowed. His wife leaned over, reading the first few lines before jerking her head toward me. "What is this?" she asked, voice shrill. He skimmed down the page, his eyes moving faster and faster. I could tell the exact moment he reached the part that listed me as the legal owner of the home they'd been living in for years. He looked up. You own the house." I nodded. "I have for 3 years. He blinked. But that's from Dad's trust. That was supposed to come to me." "It did," I said gently. "But you never filed the paperwork." "I did. I've paid the property taxes. I've covered the insurance. I've been the legal owner. You just never noticed." Silence fell. Then came the storm. His voice rose. "You're evicting us after everything we've done for you." I looked him in the eye, calm, clear. "No, I'm offering you a lease at the current market rate, 6-month term. After that, we'll reassess." His wife scoffed. "This is your way of punishing us." "No," I said. "This is me reclaiming what's mine." He stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped. "You've been planning this, hiding it from us." "No," I said again. "I was just hoping it wouldn't come to this." His voice dropped. "You wouldn't really go through with it." I turned away, folded the last napkin, and spoke to the wall because I couldn't bear to see the boy I raised looking at me like a stranger. I already did. There was no drama, no screaming, no tears, just a slow unraveling. The sound of something sacred breaking in a house that had already forgotten what grace looked like. He left the envelope on the table. They all went to bed early that night, and I washed the dishes like I always had. But this time I wasn't the maid. I was the owner. If you had spent your life being dismissed in silence, would you finally speak up through something louder than words? The next morning, no one came down for breakfast. The kitchen, usually full of cartoon voices from the television and clinking cereal bowls, was silent. I moved through it like I always had, wiping counters, folding dish towels, putting the kettle on. But the mood in the house had shifted. It was heavy, tense, like a thunderstorm was hiding just beyond the curtains. My son didn't speak to me. Not that day, not the one after either. His wife tiptoed around me like I was a ghost. But the children, they still ran into my arms after school. They still wanted stories and slices of buttered toast. That's what made it so hard, what made it all so tangled. Because even in the middle of all that distance, those children still saw me. I was still their someone. But I had made up my mind. And once a woman like me makes up her mind, after years of holding it all in, there's no going back. On the third day, my son cornered me in the laundry room. "Aunt, I've been thinking," he said, "about the lease, about the house." I didn't stop folding the shirts. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, like he used to do when he was a boy, and didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. It just caught me off guard is all. It's a lot. I folded another shirt. "I talked to Kelly," he went on. "We think maybe you should just take the master bedroom and stay here. You don't need to be upstairs in that duplex. That's not safe for your age." I looked at him then. "Is that your way of inviting me to keep being your unpaid maid?" I asked quietly. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't mean it like that." "But that's what you said, isn't it?" I asked. "To the neighbor." He went quiet. For the first time, I saw it in his eyes. Not just guilt, but realization. I pressed the last shirt into the basket. "I never asked for a palace. I asked for dignity. You took it, bit by bit, and you never even noticed." His voice cracked a little. "I just thought we were helping each other." "Helping," I repeated, "isn't one-sided." He didn't argue. He just stood there in that doorway, my grown son taller than me, older than I ever imagined he'd get, when I used to kiss his scraped knees, but somehow smaller now. He whispered, "So you're really going to move out?" "I already have," I said, "every part of me but my suitcase." He looked like he wanted to stop me, like maybe he finally understood what I was doing. But there was too much space between us now. Space he had built one unkind word at a time. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity, and I had it now. That evening, I packed the rest of my things. I didn't take much. Some clothes, my books, the old photograph of James and me on the beach. I left the fine dishes I'd brought when I first moved in. I left the spare towels. But I did take the soup pot, the one that had simmered quietly, while I listened to my own son diminish me from 10 feet away. When I zipped my suitcase and wheeled it down the hallway, no one stopped me. Not even the children. They were upstairs. They didn't know yet. Maybe someday they would ask where I went. Maybe someday they'd understand. But I couldn't wait for someday anymore. That night, I unlocked the door to the upstairs unit at East Gate. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old hardwood. I stepped inside, put my suitcase down, and exhaled. I had a home again. Not just a roof, but a place where I existed. If you had been slowly erased in your own family's home, would you have waited longer, or would you have walked out too? The next morning, sunlight poured through the old lace curtains I'd hung in the Eastgate kitchen. The room was smaller than the one I had just left. The appliances were older. The paint on the baseboards was chipped, but it felt like mine. I brewed my coffee, slowly enjoying the sound of it, percolating the rhythm of spoons, clinking gently against ceramic. No one called my name. No one asked for clean socks. No one told me the trash was full. I sat at the small round table by the window and watched birds pick at seeds in the neighbor's lawn. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting to be summoned. I opened my journal, an old leather-bound one I used to keep when James was alive. I hadn't written in it for years, but that morning I did. I didn't write about bitterness. I didn't vent or rage. I wrote about peace. I wrote about quiet. I wrote about what it means to come back to yourself after being pushed so far out of your own life. By noon, my son had called 5 times. I didn't pick up. The 6th time, he left a voicemail. His voice was low, uncertain. "Ma, can we talk?" I let it sit for 2 hours. Then I texted back, "I'll be on the porch at 5. If you come, bring your lease agreement." At 5 o'clock sharp, his car pulled up outside the little white duplex. He walked up the steps slower than I've seen him move in years. He held a manila folder in his hand. I held a pitcher of sweet tea. He sat down across from me like a stranger, not a son. There were lines on his face I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I had, but I'd been too busy folding his shirts to really see him. "I read the whole thing," he said, laying the lease on the table. "I assumed you would." His eyes searched mine. "It's fair, market rate, not inflated, not personal." "I don't do personal in contracts," I said. "But this is personal," he added quieter. I looked out over the porch rail past the hedges toward the street where we used to walk hand in hand when he was small. He would stop to collect rocks. I'd tell him they were treasure. "You told the neighbor I was your maid," I said. "That made it personal." He hung his head. "I didn't mean it," he mumbled. "But you said it," I replied. "And you lived like it was true." The air sat heavy between us. "I thought I was helping you," he said finally. "No," I said. "You were helping your ego feel generous. That's not the same thing." He winced but didn't argue. "Ma, I'm sorry." I believed him. I truly did. But apologies don't fix years. They don't undo birthdays forgotten or meals eaten in silence. They don't put my name back on photos left off the walls. So I asked, "Will you sign it?" He hesitated. "Can we maybe talk about it? Couldn't I just—" "No," I said gently. "You can't talk your way back to how it was, because how it was broke me." He signed. A shaky signature, like he didn't know who he was becoming as he wrote it. That made 2 of us. As he left, he paused on the porch steps and looked back. "Do the kids know where you are?" "I'm sure they will," I said. "And when they ask, I'll tell them the truth, that I got tired of being invisible." He nodded, slowly, like it finally landed somewhere deeper than his pride. And then he left. I sat on the porch for another hour, just listening to the wind in the trees. If the person who hurt you admits their wrongs, but only after you've reclaimed your power, do you forgive them, or do you simply let them go? The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. I started filling my time with old routines I'd forgotten I loved. I visited the local library and signed up for a poetry club on Tuesdays. I rejoined my church group on Thursdays and brought lemon bars to the first gathering. They remembered me. They hugged me like time had never passed. Funny how you don't realize how lonely you've been until you feel seen again. I bought a set of second-hand curtains for the living room floral ones, with a pattern that reminded me of my grandmother's house. I hung them with shaking arms and a proud smile. No one offered to help, but no one dismissed me either. Every nail in the wall, every photo I hung, was placed with intention. This space, small as it was, didn't just reflect me, it respected me. My son texted again midweek. We signed. First month's check enclosed. Attached was a photo of the envelope on my old nightstand in his house now officially. I replied with a simple thank you, and that was that. No emotional flood, no last-minute plea. He knew the door to forgiveness was cracked open, but it would be a long walk back through it, and this time he'd have to knock. A few days later, I received a knock of a different kind. It was Janet from the downstairs unit. She stood on the porch holding a pie peach cobbler, fresh, still warm in her hands. "I heard about what you did," she said. "Mike told me. About giving us time. About moving in upstairs." I waved it off gently. "You've been good tenants, good people." She hesitated. "It's more than that, Eleanor. It's rare. To be treated with grace when life doesn't require it." I looked at her and smiled, really smiled. "No," I said. "What's rare is being seen for who you really are." That's what I wanted too. We sat for a long time on the porch that afternoon, sipping sweet tea and listening to the wind. No need to explain, no urge to fix anything. Just two women reclaiming space in a world that rarely makes room for us. Later that night, I pulled out the lease agreement again, not to second-guess it, but to remind myself, to remember that standing up for yourself doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like walking away quietly. Sometimes it looks like finally choosing yourself. I placed the lease in a folder labeled Dignity and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. If you've been holding your breath in a place that no longer sees you waiting for kindness to return, let me ask you, when will you finally choose yourself instead? It had been a week since I left their house, and the silence hadn't broken me. It healed me. I woke up when I pleased. No footsteps pounding down the hallway. No slammed doors. No sarcastic remarks about how I loved cleaning or how retired people needed hobbies. Just the chirp of wrens outside the window and the creak of this old house settling into a peaceful rhythm. And with that silence came something else. I hadn't expected clarity. I could finally hear myself think again. One afternoon, I wandered through the second bedroom, the one I hadn't yet decided how to use. It still had its beige walls and bare floors, but something stirred in me as I stood there with the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. I saw it not for what it was, but what it could become. A sewing room maybe, or a reading nook, a place just for me. I smiled and whispered out loud, "I don't need anyone's permission anymore." I don't know if you've ever said that aloud to yourself, but it lands in the bones like a quiet revolution. That same day I received a letter, an actual letter, not an email or a text. It was from my granddaughter. She's only 10, but she writes like someone older, like she feels everything. "Dear Grandma," it began. "Dad and Mom don't talk about you much, but I miss your pancakes, I miss your stories. I miss the way you smell like lemon and sugar. When are you coming back?" My hands trembled holding the page. She enclosed a tiny pressed flower, purple. Maybe a violet from the yard I used to care for. I wrote her back that night. I didn't blame anyone. I didn't explain what happened. I told her about my new apartment, about how I was decorating it with hand-stitched pillows and thrifted treasures. I told her I missed her too. I ended with, "You can come visit any time. There will always be pancakes here and a hug." 2 days later, her mom texted me. I read the letter she got from you. Thank you for being kind. I don't deserve it, but thank you. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because not every apology needs a reply. Some are just meant to be acknowledged and set aside like stones you no longer have to carry. Instead, I went to the market and bought fresh blueberries and flour. I ironed the cloth napkins. I lit a candle on the windowsill. Not for them, for me, for the woman who had given so much and finally started giving back to herself. I wasn't waiting to be welcomed anymore. I was welcoming myself into the rest of my life. And maybe that's the truest kind of homecoming there is. If someone from your past reached out not to repair, but to acknowledge your quiet strength, would you answer with softness or protect your peace in silence? A month had passed. I marked it quietly, no cake, no party. Just a soft cup of tea and a walk down to the creek near the back of the property. The air smelled like honeysuckle. I let my fingers trail along the wooden railing as I stepped onto the little footbridge. It was the first time in years I'd felt the earth under my own plans, not someone else's demands. I had started writing again, something I hadn't done since James died. Short stories, letters I'd never send, memories that lived only in the quiet corners of my heart. I wrote about the first time I saw my son's face. I wrote about the way he used to call me Mama when he was tired. I wrote about how complicated love becomes when respect disappears, because that was always the problem. Not the chores, not the space, not even the things left unsaid. It was the respect, the dignity, the small everyday acknowledgments that say, "You matter here." I think he started to understand that. 2 weeks after the lease was signed, my son dropped off the first rent check in person. No envelope, no dramatic speech, just a plain folded check and a paperclip. I added an extra 100, he said, avoiding my eyes. For what it's worth. I didn't take it. I handed it back and said, "Pay what's written, nothing more. This isn't about guilt." He nodded, looking like he wanted to say more but didn't know how. Instead, he asked, "Can the kids visit sometime?" I looked at him for a long moment, then asked softly, "Will they come because they want to, or because you told them to?" That hit him hard. I saw it. "I'll let them decide," he whispered. And that was enough for now, because I didn't want apologies twisted into obligation. I didn't want gestures made from shame. I wanted real change, and change I'd learned isn't loud. It's a series of small decisions made consistently with intention. That weekend my granddaughter did come. She brought a bag of books and her favorite blanket. We made blueberry pancakes and built a fort in the living room. She curled up beside me that night and asked, "Are you still mad at Daddy?" I wrapped an arm around her. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm just making different choices now." She nodded like she understood more than she should have to. The next morning, she drew me a picture, me standing in front of a little white house with hearts in all the windows. "This is your castle," she told me, and she was right. It wasn't grand. It didn't have turrets or silk curtains or chandeliers. But it had peace, it had boundaries, it had truth. And more than anything, it had me standing whole in my own space. If someone offered you a chance to rebuild not your life, but your sense of worth brick by brick, would you take it? The seasons began to change. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came the scent of jasmine through the open window at night. I started to sleep with the curtains half drawn, just to feel the moonlight across the quilt I'd stitched by hand years ago. I watered the little herb garden outside my kitchen door each morning. Basil, rosemary, mint, nothing fancy, just life growing slowly without permission. One day in June, I was at the farmer's market. browsing through ripe tomatoes and fresh bread, when I saw someone across the stalls. Kelly, my daughter-in-law. She looked different, tired, thinner, like someone running on fumes. But when our eyes met, she smiled. A real smile. Not the tight, strained one she used to wear like armor. She walked over slowly. No rush, no theatrics. Hi, Eleanor. Hi, Kelly. We stood in silence for a moment before she spoke again. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I wasn't raised to know better, and I should have tried harder. You were never the maid. You were the foundation. I didn't speak right away. I just let her words settle between us like dust finding a home. I appreciate that I finally said. She looked down. I miss your cooking. The kids do too. I smiled gently. They can always come visit. That door never closed. It just got moved. She laughed, eyes wet. I know. We talked for a few more minutes about recipes, about how the kids were doing in school. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't push. And that told me more than any apology ever could. She was learning. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh loaf of bread and a bowl of herb butter I'd whipped myself. I didn't set 4 plates. I didn't make too much food. I didn't wait for anyone to walk through the door. I just ate, alone, peacefully, content. But partway through the meal, I realized something. I wasn't lonely. I had mistaken silence for loneliness for too long. But now I understood they were different things. Silence can hold you. Silence can heal you. I didn't need a house full of noise to feel alive. I just needed to know that my life was mine again. I think a lot about women like me. Women who raised families, cooked meals, folded lives into every drawer, and were still told they were too much, or in the way, or just the help. We absorb those messages until we don't, until something small snaps, like a birthday missed, or a joke we weren't meant to hear, or a dinner where your presence is treated like furniture. And we begin again. I sat there with the window open, the sound of cicadas filling the dusk, and I allowed myself a long breath of gratitude. Because I had finally done what so many women are afraid to do. I walked out of the room where I wasn't being respected, and I built a new one from scratch. If someone finally sees the hurt they caused, not all at once, but piece by piece, can healing ever find its way back? In the 4th of July came, and with it a letter in the mailbox. It wasn't from my son. It wasn't from his wife. It was from my grandson. He's only 8, still learning how to spell. But the words hit harder than any adult apology could. Grandma, Daddy said we were mean to you. I'm sorry. Can I come swim at your new house? I'll be good. I miss your grilled cheese. There were a few backwards letters, a smudge from what might have been jelly, and a sticker on the envelope, one of those sparkly ones kids put on lunchboxes. A smiling star with sunglasses. I read it twice, then I cried, because that letter wasn't written out of guilt. It wasn't orchestrated by his parents. It was honest, unfiltered, kind. The kind of kindness that isn't born, it's taught. And somehow, despite everything, some part of me must have taught it to him. That weekend I said yes. He came with his little floaties, his towel half dragging on the ground, and his hair wild from the wind. He hugged me like nothing had ever gone wrong, like time didn't matter, like love doesn't always need an apology to stay alive. We swam in the small above-ground pool I'd put up behind the duplex. We made grilled cheese and ate on paper plates. He asked to sleep over. I said yes. And when he was brushing his teeth that night, he looked up at me in the mirror and said, "You feel like real grandma again." I almost couldn't breathe because somewhere along the way, in trying not to rock the boat, I had forgotten what that felt like to be me, fully, freely, lovingly. Later, when I tucked him in, he whispered, "Dad says you're brave." It was the first I'd heard of that. And maybe I was. Brave for walking out. Brave for staying silent when I could have screamed. Brave for loving without begging. Brave for saying this far no further. That Sunday, when my son came to pick him up, he lingered at the door. "You look happy," he said. I looked at him, not with pride or scorn, but with a peace he hadn't yet learned to recognize. "I am." He nodded. "I don't know if I deserve to come back in, Mom." I didn't answer right away. Just reached for the child's bag and handed it to him gently. "Deserve is a word people use when they're scared," I said. "The door's there. Whether you knock on it with respect is up to you." And then I closed it, softly, not as a punishment, but as a reminder. This was my home now, and I had learned to keep the lock turned in the direction of peace. If someone who once erased your worth slowly starts to whisper your value again, would you let them in? Or would you wait to see if the door truly matters to them? August brought heat waves and quiet evenings. I spent them on the porch barefoot, sipping iced tea, and watching the world slow down. Everything moved softer now, even my breath, even my thoughts. The neighborhood kids sometimes waved as they rode past on bikes. Janet would come up from the downstairs unit and bring me little things zucchini from her garden, a pie, once even a paperback mystery novel with a sticky note. "The grandmother solves everything in the end. Thought of you." It made me laugh, not a polite chuckle, a real one, the kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. I was healing in layers I hadn't realized were wounded. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized something even deeper. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that once simmered in my chest over being overlooked, over being treated like furniture, had cooled. I didn't feel the need to show them anymore. I wasn't living in spite. I was living in choice. I had taken back my name, my space, my voice. And just as I was learning to settle into this new rhythm, the doorbell rang. It was my son. He looked different, not defeated, humbled. He held nothing in his hands, no flowers, no checkbook, no empty gestures. "Hey," he said. I nodded. "Hey, could I sit?" I stepped aside, motioned toward the porch bench. He sat like someone not sure if they were allowed to be comfortable. For a few minutes we just watched the sky. It was streaked with the early signs of sunset lavender clouds, gold lines, stretching toward the horizon. I didn't come to ask for anything he said. I just wanted to say thank you for what you taught me. I didn't interrupt. I used to think being a man meant providing, that if I paid bills and kept the lights on, I was doing my part. But I forgot what you always gave us: presence, warmth, the glue in all our cracks. His voice caught in his throat. I disrespected that. I disrespected you, and I don't know how to make it right. I turned to him not as a woman scorned, but as a mother who had once believed too much in silence. You make it right by becoming better, not for me, for your children, so they never treat someone the way you treated me. He looked down. I've started helping more, at home, with the kids, with Kelly. I don't want to repeat the same harm. That's good, I said softly. But don't do it to earn your way back here. Do it because it's the kind of man you were always meant to be. He nodded, tears welling. We sat like that until the sun dipped completely and the porch light flickered on above us. As he stood to leave, he asked quietly, "Do you think there's still a place for me in your life someday?" I thought about that little girl who still visits me for pancakes, about the boy who wrote with backwards letters and asked to come swimming, about the woman I used to be, begging to be seen. I gave him the only honest answer I could. I'm still deciding. He nodded. I'll be here, however long it takes. And then he walked away, not as my son the adult, but as the boy I once raised, finally learning how to say sorry with his actions. If the one who broke your heart starts to rebuild the bridge with steady hands, not words, would you walk across it someday? September brought the first breeze of fall. The air shifted lighter in the mornings, cooler through the windows at night. I found myself craving soup again, the kind I used to make on long Sundays before they forgot what Sundays meant. So I made a pot from scratch: celery, carrots, onion, thyme. The smell filled my little upstairs kitchen, curling into the air like it remembered me. I ladled it into a bowl and set it on the table for myself. And that's when I realized I had stopped waiting for company to feel useful, stopped waiting for family to feel whole, stopped waiting for respect like it was a prize someone else had to award me. I was whole, even alone. That week I hosted my granddaughter for another sleepover. She brought a friend this time, told me they wanted to have a granny cottage weekend. Like it was a holiday you could circle on a calendar. They helped me plant bulbs in the little garden, outside daffodils and tulips. I let them pick the spots even if it meant they were uneven. It wasn't about the symmetry, it was about the roots. As we worked, she looked up at me, dirt on her nose, and said, "Grandma, are you going to stay here forever?" And I smiled. "As long as it feels like home." She didn't question that. That's the gift of children. They don't need explanations wrapped in pain. They just need presence. And I was finally learning how to give that fully without sacrificing myself. Later that night, while they watched cartoons wrapped in throw blankets, I sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. For a moment, I thought about all the things I never said when I should have. All the no's I swallowed just to keep the peace. All the birthdays I made my own cake for. But I didn't feel bitter. I felt brave, because the quiet revenge of a woman finding her self-worth again. It's not loud, it's not cruel, it's calm. It's choosing joy even when you were handed disrespect. It's building a new dinner table where love doesn't come with conditions. And that's what I had now. My son had texted twice since that visit. Just updates, polite ones, no expectations. I appreciated that. Not because I needed his approval, but because I saw a flicker of change. And that flicker, small as it was, meant the cycle could end with me. I would not pass on a legacy of silence. I would not teach these children that love is something you tolerate. I would teach them instead that love is earned with care, and that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of jasmine and broth. This was peace, and I had earned every inch of it. If you finally built a life where your worth was no longer questioned, would you let the old wounds back in? Or would you trust the garden you planted now to bloom just as it is? The leaves began to fall in earnest, rust-red, golden, papery things that blanketed the sidewalk and drifted into my flower beds, no matter how often I swept them away. Each morning I found a few more. I didn't rush to clean them anymore. There was something gentle about watching the world let go of what it no longer needed. I suppose I'd done the same. One Saturday morning, I pulled down the old box marked fall decor from the closet shelf. Inside were trinkets I hadn't seen since James passed a ceramic pumpkin I'd painted with my son when he was 9, a cinnamon-scented candle, a little wooden sign that read, "Family is everything." That one made me pause. I turned it over in my hand, wondering if it still rang true. The words themselves hadn't changed, but I had. Maybe family was everything, but only if it knew how to hold you without using you. I placed it gently by the window anyway. Not because I believed it blindly, but because I still hoped it could be true again someday. That afternoon, there was another knock at the door. It was my son again, but this time with both children in tow. No warning, no long text beforehand. Just 3 faces under a cloudy sky and a small paper bag in his hand. "I didn't come to stay," he said quickly. "Just wanted to give you this." Inside the bag was a bundle of fresh rosemary tied with twine. I remembered it's what you used in that soup. I looked down at the herbs, then up at the boy I raised, now a man, learning how to look at people instead of through them. "Thank you," I said. I meant it. He didn't ask to come in, but the kids did. We made cards. They shouted, "Can we show you?" I let them in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I had eaten alone at just weeks ago. And now here it was again, filled with markers and glue sticks and laughter. One of the cards was crooked and smudged with purple hearts and big letters, "You're not a maid, you're a queen." I nearly dropped it. I blinked hard and smiled through the tears. "That's quite a title," I whispered. They hugged me, their small arms full of sugar and sincerity. My son didn't say much, but before he left, he turned back and said, "I'm trying, Mom." I nodded, "I see that," and that was enough for now. Not full reconciliation, not clean slates, just the kind of beginning that didn't erase the pain, but honored the lessons it carved. That night I made soup again, with rosemary this time. I lit a candle and sat at my table with a bowl, a spoon, and the hum of a home that finally felt right again. Not because they had come back, but because I had. To myself and to the truth that had taken a lifetime to name. You don't have to scream to reclaim your place. You just have to stop whispering your worth. If someone once pushed you aside and now comes knocking with effort in their eyes, do you open the door fully, or just enough to watch them learn how to knock better? Autumn settled in, gently, like a warm quilt pulled across weary shoulders. The air carried that familiar scent of dried leaves and distant chimney smoke, quiet things that remind you how even the earth knows when it's time to let go. I found myself moving slower these days, but not because I was tired. I was savoring each cup of tea, each breeze through the window, each small act of living that once got lost in the background of other people's needs. The house creaked when it was cold. The curtains swayed without invitation. The silence no longer ached. It wrapped around me like a second skin. I wasn't lonely. I was settled. Sometimes I still think about that day in the kitchen, the soup on the stove, the words that cut through me without a blade. "She's the new maid," but even those words have softened now. Not because they didn't hurt, but because I'm no longer living inside the version of me who let them define her. I grew out of that silence. I built something sturdier from it. And now when I look around this space, this modest lavender-scented sunlit corner of my life, I don't see what I lost. I see what I reclaimed. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by those you love the most, I hope this story finds you like a hand on your back, reminding you you are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are not too much. You are enough right now as you are. So light the candle, set the table for one, and pour the soup even if it's just for you. Because you matter. You always have.